So for this next part, make sure you do your practice on your own, and then you can check it using the video, but make sure that you're actually doing this on your own, please. And again, I want you to make sure that you're showing the factors involved when we get a common denominator. Okay, so you can pause the video and then work on this, come back and check your answers. Okay, so I'm gonna add 1/3 to 1/5. So I need, my common denominator is going to end up being 15. So I need to do this in groups of 5 and groups of 5 here. Okay. For the 1/5 fraction, I'm going to do groups of 3 and groups of 3 here. Okay, so that what that does is it generates my common denominator. Okay, so I have 5/15. 5/15 is going to be the same as 1/3. That's an equivalent fraction. I have 3/15, which is equivalent to 1/5. And so I end up with 8. And again, I keep the size of the fractions the same. So I keep it as 8/15. For this one here, the common denominator, we could multiply these together and get 48. And again, multiples will give us, the right, we'll be able to do it into the right increments. However, the lowest common multiple here is going to be 24. So I'm going to use a times by 4. And again, this is the important part, showing this times factor. Times by 4. And for the 8, I'm going to use a times by 3. Okay, so times 3 times 3. And that gives me the common size fraction of 1/24. So the 4/24 is the same as 1/6. 3/24 is the same as 1/8. And so now I have the same size fractions. I can add them together, and the size of the fraction doesn't change. Okay, so there's my solution. So same thing here. I'm going to get, this time I'm going to use times 3 times 7. Okay, so I'm going to use times 3 to get 21 here, and then I'm going to use times 7 to get the 21. So my factor, again, this is the important part, showing me this factor, times 7, times 7. Okay, I'm going to end up with 6/21. That's equivalent to 2/7. I'm going to end up with 7/21, which is equivalent to 1/3. And together I count 13 pieces, and the size of the pieces is 21/21 size pieces. So here we end up with 4/5. I'm going to use a times 4, groups of 4, groups of 4, plus 3/4. I'm going to do groups of 5. So I'm going to do groups of 5, groups of 5. Okay, my common denominator fraction is going to be 16/20. That's same as 4/5, which is 80%. Here I'm going to do 15/20. Okay, that's going to be same as 75%. And together I end up counting 31 pieces, and the size pieces don't change. Okay, they are 20ths. And again, if I can reduce these fractions, I should reduce these fractions. Okay, so if I'm adding together 3 fractions, I need a common denominator for all 3 fractions. So in this case, looks like I can use a common denominator of 2. So a common denominator of 6. I'm going to do times 2 times 2. Okay, plus 5/6. I'm going to use a times, there's not going to be times anything here. For the 1/2, I'm going to use a times 3 and times 3. Okay, so this is going to, because I did the top and bottom the same, I'm going to keep the same fraction. So 2/6 is same as 1/3. 5/6 and 3/6 is same as 1/2. Now I can add the numerators together. The denominator, the size of the pieces stay the same. So I'm going to end up with, looks like here, 10/6. Okay, so that's a good enough answer Although really we can simplify that to 5 over 3 by doing a divide by 2. Here it looks like the common denominator is going to be 24. Okay, so to get the 24 as my common denominator, here I need a times by 3, times by 3. My 1/3, I need a times by 8. And here for the 1/4, I need times by 6. Okay, so to get my common denominator of 24. Now, if you multiplied all these numbers together, you would actually get a common denominator. Okay, by its nature, by multiplying, we get common multiples. However, it doesn't end up being the lowest common denominator, which makes things a little bit harder, but not wrong. It's not that it's wrong, it just makes it more complicated and messy. So here we're going to end up with, okay, 9 over 24 is equivalent to 3/8. 8 over 24 is equivalent to 1/3. 6 over 24 is equivalent to 1/4. Now I can add up the numerators. I can count. I've got 23 in the numerator, and the size of the pieces don't change. Okay. So same thing here. We need to get the common size pieces. Okay, so it looks like, well, this is a little bit harder, but it looks like 40 might be the lowest common multiple of those three numbers. Okay, so I'm going to start with 4/5 and times it by 8. My 3/4 is going to be times by 10. So times by 10, times by 10, I get my denominator 40 here, and then my 1/8, this one's going to be times by 5. So I get my times by 5, times by 5, and I end up with 32 out of 40, which is equivalent to 80% or 4/5. Here I get 30 out of 40, which is equal to 3/4. Here I get 5 out of 40, which is equal to 1/8. And this all adds up to 67 over 40, and there's my final answer. And again, you do not need to put it into a mixed number for me. Okay, in fact, I prefer the improper fractions. The last one here looks like the common denominator. Well, it doesn't share any common factors, so the common denominator looks like to be 60. Okay, so I get 2 over 5. Okay, so I'm going to times by 4 and times by 3, so I'm going to times by 12. Plus my 3/4 fraction. I'm going to times by 15 on top and bottom, so times by 5 and times by 3. Okay, so I'm going to end up with 1/3. I'm going to times by 20 and times by 20 on top and bottom. And so I'm going to end up with 24 over 60, and I'm going to end up with 45 over 60, and I'm going to end up with 20 over 60. Okay, so 44, this ends up being 89 out of 60 as my final answer. Okay, so then why do we need equivalent denominator to add fraction, or a common denominator? We need the same, so we need same size pieces. Okay, if we don't have the same size pieces, we can't count or we can't add. Okay, so why does multiplying the numerator or denominator with the same factor not change the value of fraction? because it's proportionally the same. Okay, so there we go.